the creation of evil, or the start. I don't even know where to start. We have many fragments of stories from which to tap. Myths, various pieces of text. We have references in the Old Testament. We have references in Syrian texts, references in Arabic texts. We have fairly complete Arabic versions of the Book of the Giants, the Ogia. The Ogias, Ogam, is the language of the giants. We have references of this language in this ancient culture. We have weird remnants left behind in South America, Mexico, and the Americas, New Zealand, Australia, across the world of these ancient cultures with high technology. And all these legends, all these stories. And the latest edition thereof is how King David vanquished Goliath, who was supposedly the last, apparently not, though, as history indicates. And King George going out to slay the dragon is not just a mythical story. There were dragons. There were deformed, humanoid, monstrous creatures with human-type intelligence that walk the earth. This is what all the cultures suggest. This is what these ancient histories are about. And this has been glossed over. It's like, how can I say, someone has not wanted us to know. And along with the history of Tartaria, the history of the ancient world, the ridiculous stories of how the pyramids were built, what they try to sell off on us in terms of archaeology and ancient history has very often been laughably silly. My own knowledge of this is limited. We have the stories of Samyaza, and how Samyaza gave the name, the Tetragrammaton, which is an ancient Babylonian name, which comes from older sources in the cuneiform sources. And Samyaza gave the name to Ishtar, and later this was transferred to Tabayat and Tabayal. This name was taught to man. This was what was called the Pika oath in these ancient scrolls. And obviously it was enunciated by Michael, And this is the binding oath that the Creator has with all the beings that maintain their part of creation. For creation is a cooperation of an enormous string of heavenly beings that form a chain of continuity through which the intention of the Creator can become manifest here on the physical plane through the cooperation in accordance with the divine law as set out. Through this process of evolution and being expressed therein by the will of the supreme creation, which is an emanation of the mental sphere, a recreation of something from the outside, almost as if we are the presence of some great dream in the mind of a greater being becoming manifest through the activities of the cooperation of what we call the heavenly choir, the heavenly arrangement. And these are expressed on the physical plane throughout the heavens and nature. So, these are the basic ideas, right? And hence, the magical arts are what they are. Hence, we understand the archetypal structures of being and attempt to quantify the steps of creation, if we can put it that way, through understanding a process of emanations that build a continuity through the hypostatic aspects of this manifestation as it seems to be put together perceptually. So in this process, we look at our history and we see that the story of the fallen ones. And now we are essentially talking about the story of the egregore and how the egregore fell from grace. In the older stories, Ezekiel mentions this. It's mentioned in Ezekiel's writings. It's also mentioned in depth in the book of Ogam, or the Ogia, or Ogias. There's different versions of it, right? But there's versions of this book seems to have gotten around. There's translations of it in China, there's translations in Arabic, Persian, Middle English, Old English, Latin. The popular ones were, what's that guy's name? I always forget his name. The Lucchini, whatever his name is. That was in 1700s, wasn't it? And he popularized this. And then there was this Manichaeism, right? The Mene. And this whole cult that was trying to reinvigorate these old precepts, ancient teachings, which came through the Ogam, through the Ogia, because with the Ogam came a treatise on the 5 elements, which doesn't seem to be able to be found. Though the theory is that what is the Chinese practice of the Tao is that piece of that knowledge that was taken and hidden far away when the collapse of that civilization came into being and there was these great wars. The knowledge wanted to be protected. And the giants were also running away from a cataclysm that they had seen because they had started getting visions. And they'd also been tricked by Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Oriel, though Oriel is named slightly differently in the Ogyam. And these beings tricked the giants by giving them some form of technology. Now, this seems to align with Celtic mythology, right, of the 2 brothers. There's this constant story in every culture that we look at with these 2 brothers. And the feud of these 2 brothers, and these 2 brothers were like, yeah, one was benevolent towards humans, one wasn't. One gave us agriculture, writing, knowledge, science, medical. Another one enslaved us. And these 2 became a warring culture on the planet, and we were sort of the piggy in the middle, right? And so we hear of the wars between the giants. Some of the giants sided with the humans and some went against the humans. And there were these great wars. So they've always been benevolent giants. This is something to understand. That's why if you look at photographs from the 1700s and the 1600s and the 1800s, well, photos from the 17 and paintings from 1650, they're always giants just happen to be around. It's just strange. That person's double the size of that person. Nobody comments on it. Like, double the size. Hello? That's not like within the normal range of what we consider anomaly. If there's a 12-foot person walking down the road across the bridge with all the other people and they're all normal height, and you see in the distance there's another 9-foot person, you think, well, that's a very strange range of height. Well, that's because we are told that the angels came down and mixed their seeds with the humans in the Bible, and that's the same story which has been plagiarized from older systems of thought. And that ancient story basically is pointing at these 200 egregori that were able to take flesh after breaking their covenant. Now, the nature of reality and creation is based upon this covenant, this agreement that hangs upon creation like a seal. And they broke their seal, they broke their covenant, and they swore a new allegiance and a new covenant to who we consider this adversary, right? And there were these great wars, and all 200 of the egregori were killed by the angelic hosts through the activities of the 4 archangels in great and terrible wars, as they're outlined. And they became disembodied, but their children survived. And by children, we are talking about what we are considering called abominations. Now, Bohemian thought, this is bomi. There's something about this name in ancient times. And it comes from Bohemian cosmology and Bohemian philosophy. And this is essentially the Ogya. So we came back to 2 routes of knowledge that came to this earth. And the one route is an Egyptian route. And the one route is some other route, which became the Ogam ruins, right? And the Ogam ruins through that other ruins. And then there were 2 allegiances, and humans became split in their allegiances between these 2 groups. And some humans were alleged to one group and the other to another. Now, this is why we understand the Freemasonic need to understand bloodlines and the Illuminati's obsession with a particular bloodline to be in charge. Does this all start to make a little more sense now? Because this is an ancient feud that's going on for a long time. So they know this history.
They want to reenact something. They know what they're doing. And this has got to do with the ancient mystery of the Ahriman. Now, Ahriman is mentioned in these ancient texts a number of times, which is the previous blueprint for man. Yeah, previous. Are we talking about a previous epoch? Or are we speaking about a previous reality? Now, the Vedas is quite specific about the nature of time and space and how it unvolves and revolves. And that the nature of the reality actually, some kind of a big bang does happen. It implodes, goes out of being, everything's destroyed, and comes back into being, and everything's recreated. And this is part of nature. And it happens ever so often, which is calculatable in terms of years. And the Vedic cosmologists have means of calculating this as per their doctrines and their knowledge of science. So that's got to do with the yugas and the great span of the yugas and what they represent and where they're heading and where they come from. So in the Vedic stories, we've got all of this. Now, we've also got to understand that Indra is actually mentioned in these old documents. So here we've got the first correlation between the Vedic thought and we've got the old, what we call the Egyptian lights, and they were somehow connected because there was a King Indra. They also speak about another name of this King Indra, and they give us a date of him being 3,200 years after after the time of Ezekiel. So we start to build timelines here. And this we reference back to the Old Testament of the Jews. And then there's also the Nag Hammadi scrolls, which have also references of this in different ideas, different names, but the same stories being told. And of course, the scrolls from Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, those also yet contain. So we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've got the Nag Hammadi scrolls, two sets of scrolls. Obviously, the Essenes had a big role to play, though there were more numbers, there were more greater orders related to the Alexandrian priesthoods that were connected through this network. Basically, a network of knowledge. Like we've got a network of knowledge here, they had networks of knowledge then, sharing knowledge and discourse and such in order to improve knowledge. So that seems to be the history that we're looking at in some form here. And that these 200 egregori, after they were thrashed, were able to communicate with. And I believe that the angels somehow communicated and influenced and manipulated the situation to get pieces of technology into the giants' hands so that they could destroy themselves. And that is outlined where God is speaking to the angels. And Ezekiel comes in a vision to warn two of the giant kings. And they start having these three visions. And in it, there are these tablets that they're looking at. And these tablets represent three aspects of an outcome to be relating to their future and their demise, the demise of the giant seed, and how they would become disembodied spirits waiting in the earth for their final destruction. And how their fathers burn in those endless fires. So that's the first reference of endless fires as well. Let's be clear about that I found. The concept of hell is first outlined here. It's the first place I have come across it. And these are ancient scrolls, ancient documents where we've got Ezekiel being one of the characters. Very interesting. So how old these documents are, we don't know. They only became popular in the Middle Ages, but they've been around for a long time, and they've been in Arabic libraries for thousands of years, right? As well as all the other libraries from all the different sources, the Syrian sources, the Ethiopian sources, very old. So, and then of course the Egyptian sources and the Jewish sources and the Greek sources and the Celtic, they're Celtic versions of these stories, where the two weapons that were given to these two brothers, the giant brothers, were one was the bow and one was the sword. And this is once again reiterated through and how they used these weapons to destroy each other. But it's also spoken about how this was plotted and planned by the four archangels and God. This was a plan hatched to caused the giants to destroy themselves because they were lording over the humanity. So now, who are the demons? The demons were those that broke their covenant. And they took charge of their own evolution. And in the process, they inverted their evolution. In the process of the binding oath that they swore to their new legionnaire, inverted their perspective. So their evolution started to work backwards. So they started to become animalistic and devolved over the eons and to become what they are today. Going back to their lizard natures, because that's sort of the very early form of our evolutional consciousness and physical forms. And so this is how we imitate them artistically and how we experience them, and why that quality is always there. People are telling you about them being abducted by these lizard beings because this is really what it is. And we call these beings the archons, for the archons is how they have been mentioned through the Hebrew traditions, and how these archons then took form once again. And the archons are the representatives of the egregore that were actually there. Their part of the arrangement was to watch over humanity. That was their job. And they noticed humanity's behavior and they thought, why are we watching over these bloody idiots? These beings, and look at how they're behaving and look what's going on here. And they thought, we are more evolved than these. Why are we bowing to these? Because part of the covenant, and I want us to understand this, part of the covenant is that they serve us because we are created as God. So we are with the God powers. So they are bound to serve us. And we can bind them by these names of God. And this is what the magical arts is largely about. And it has been abused in ancient times. And this name seems to be the central focus of a lot of what is the basis of the story, because then we've got this development of the Ogyas, which is basically Oya and Aya, who were the sons of the chief of the egregore. And that is the Sham or the Shamash. And this was like the big honcho. And those two, their bloodlines were distinguished as important. And all the rest of the offspring, now we're talking about the Nephilim, yeah? They were considered to be yakshas. They were of the other yakshas. Now, yakshas is, in the Vedic story, they are called rakshas. And the same story is in the Vedas. And how their chief went against Brahman, the fundamental god, and so they had to get together and they tricked them and they overthrew them. This is the story. There's also a story of how the two giant kings got intertwined and tricked by the gods. And this is a story in the Vedas too, of how the one was tricked into becoming beguiled and falling in love with the other one's wife and having an affair with them. And they're not sure how this happened, but it was done. It was by decree of the angelics. And this started a terrible war between the giants, where they were able to utilize that terrible technology that they'd been given. You see, they were tricked first by given technology and then tricked into getting into a war. And it was over a woman, which I find rather amusing. Regardless, as far as I know the story, Shamash was obviously immortal. So these were immortals that lost their immortality and end up enslaved and killed in this. And this area was sealed over. And this is the beginning and the creation of the abyss. It's mentioned in most of our traditions. And they were hidden away from us. They couldn't access us. And it was told after 1,000 years they would be near again. Now, this is the predictions that came on the side of these traditions. So the story is that Shamash, right, that Ogyas and Oya, I believe, are those the two that were taught the name. I think they were taught the names. And these were the Mazans. Now the Mazans, the Masons, the Mazans, the Masons, the Mazans, the Masons. I don't know if that's the true connection, but it makes me think of that when I hear about the Mazans. And it does mean monsters. I mean, the word doesn't mean monsters, but it seems to have it relates somehow to monstrous or deformed, I think. What was the other name? What was the other word that was there? There was a gyas. Was it gyas? Something like that. And so you've got that. No, it wasn't gyas. It was kwa. It was kwa. Now we're looking at the Chinese tradition. You see here we're seeing the connections once again between China and all these other different traditions, and they seem to be dovetailing towards this one point, and there's the giants and this great war that drove these two apart and caused the destruction. And it was followed up by a great deluge. And the deluge was shown to the giants in dreams, and they were running away, trying to escape from the deluge, according to the stories. And they were spreading to the far corners of the earth. And it mentions a survival of one of the big giants that was able to survive. And of course, then the story goes that this giant goes and abducts a woman and starts breeding and creating a new race of the sub-giants. So here we go, the ancient stories once again reenacted, once again women being abducted, once again more giants being created, and the war starting again. And it got out of hand to the point where we've got the story of King David apparently finishing the story. And these are the descendants of the original demons. Now, it is said that these beings are also, as their parents, devolving and demonizing. And the word demon thus refers to an inverted evolutional cycle whereby a highly evolved being starts to take on certain traits of unevolution while maintaining certain traits of evolution to become a twisted form of a highly evolved being that has fundamental primal evolutional facilities. Like compassion is quite a later level of evolution, and that becomes devolved out of the being along with other elements, and that is the essential disconnect from the spiritual connection, which is the radiance of life, which is the essence of that which is expressed through the connection between all beings. And one that rejects connection, which is fostered and maintained through compassion and love, is rejecting the essential source of love, of life. Love and life come from the same root of the word. So by rejecting life, life needs to be replenished, and so a mastery over the natural law becomes the alternative solution. But there are perfect limits within natural law as decreed by the law of nature. So added juice is required, and hence the vampirism and preying on the human psyche and the human consciousness in order to gain energetic sustenance of the emotional qualities that they can thus use in their alchemies to maintain their systems, lest they devolve further and lose touch with them, become big monstrous beings that realm unconscious, destroying everything in their sight, like the Leviathan. Speaking of the Leviathan, what is the story of the Leviathan? Leviathan was destroyed. Who was the one that killed Leviathan? I'm going to go and try and see if I can find that information. I shall be back. Oh, I don't know really. I'm thinking it's Mahahwe who was, but I don't know. I need to go and look. This is connected to a Bairob Dalad or Dalade or Dalud. You see deluge, Dalud. Bairob. Now, Bairob in Sanskrit is related to an archetype of Shiva. And Shiva rules over the Denzians, over the Rakshas. Right? We're talking about the Yakshas here, we're talking about the Rakshas. These ancient stories dovetail totally. It's telling the same story. And so Mahahwe, and in India we have the Mahadev. Right. So we can gain an insight to the story by looking at the story of the Mahadev's connection with the Rakshas to understand the Mahahwe's connection with the Yakshas. It's actually interesting. There's a lot of research open. I'm going to post some links here. I don't have a very perfect knowledge. I wish I knew more. I've been more interested in the practical aspects, and it's only more paying more attention over the later years to really understand those histories, because I thought they weren't important. I thought just what I know is important. But I'm realizing that in order to understand the greater perspective, the evolutional cycles do need to be grasped, because there have been different epochs and there are different knowledges from different epochs available on Earth, and they all work in different ways, and they don't all necessarily dovetail in the right way if utilized. Sort of like you can cook French food, or you can cook Chinese food, or you can cook, Italian food. But if you're just going to indiscriminately mix the recipes of Chinese, Indian, and Italian and all of them in one, you're going to end up with a very weird broth that might not be flavorsome. Some elements will be compatible between the different cultures and some won't. In an example, have you tried putting ginger, a lot of ginger, into a basil pasta? You're going to end up with a different kind of a flavor, which is not going to be anything necessarily that you're looking for. So that is sort of what I have sort of noticed, and putting the different groups together. Joshua, I want you to leave and close the door. You're making a noise. It's uncool. Okay? Go out of the room. We're going to make a noise outside. Thank you. So that's basically what I've sort of got here. Sorry it's such a long recording. It's just a very deep story, and I only know what I know, and I can't really so coherently put it together for you because there are fragments floating around, but there is a story within these fragments that seem to come into being, and it all goes back to the 200 watchers in the egregore that fell and were defeated and became disembodied spirits and tried to recreate the connection with their children, which were the giants. They're called the Anakim in the Hebrews, and the Anakim are actually the descendants of the original hybrids, right? The Nephilim, and they were taught by them and assisted in their war against the angelic choirs, and that's sort of the divine war that we've all been hearing about, in this war in heaven and war on earth. This is the gist of the story as far as I can put it together. And I hope it's helpful, but I'm definitely going to go and take a look, and over the course of this afternoon, I'm going to put as many links here as I can find into audio. There's a lot in the written as well. I mean, you just have to Google these names in the search bar of the other library, the Hansa library, where there's the 27,000 books. And there's a lot of these ancient books that are in text form too. So that's useful if you're listening to your audiobook. You can probably just open the text one from there, or download it, whatever, put it in your device and just keep it in the side and look at any words that you don't hear or that you're intrigued by, and you can see them as they're written. Anyway, so much love. Everybody be well, be thriving, be smiling, be shining. And I hope this is a conversation that thrives, because I do think it's fundamental to understanding a lot of the indoctrination that we've been given, and a lot of it has just been taking these ancient stories and twisting it into something that isn't sensible and sort of shoved down our throats.